Grace to you and peace from God our Father and Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, as we have gathered in the midst of his presence here this morning. Now, I seem to have this pet peeve about how we use the word love, and since this really is a love story, I'm going to be speaking to that. That a few weeks ago, I referenced that there are actually 4 words in the Greek language that we in English then will just simply translate as love. But not one of those 4 words has anything to do with personal benefit. Yet, in our usage of the word love, we often look at it in that manner, that how does it personally benefit myself? I really love that movie, or I love chocolate. It's all about how it somehow blesses me, how it makes me feel good, how it makes my life personally better. And that would be neither here nor there if we didn't choose to also use the word love when we reference relationships. That I love that person. I love these people. Well, if we have in the back of our head how we often use that word love that speaks to how it benefits me, then there is a temptation, it seems to me, that we also bring that to the table when we're talking about our relationships. And it really appears to me that that's a keen issue in our culture, that we think that it's about me. We had days back a while ago that talked about the me generation. Now we don't even really speak about that. It is really assumed that it's about me, and that's how we do our advertising. How is it that it's going to speak to me personally? So I decided I was going to ask my friend, Mr. Google, what does love look like when it benefits oneself? So when I wrote that in, here's the article that came up. It is entitled, "The Benefits of Being in Lust Instead of Love." And I go, well, okay. I guess at least it recognizes that there is this kind of selfish piece or the part that's looking at personal stuff. And understand, I'm going to push the boundaries of how we normally think of the word lust. That for me, it looks to that Greek word eros, where we get our word erotic. That there is nothing inherently good or bad about such. It's how we utilize it. And it really is that romantic kind of attraction that we have. And to understand, too, that we use this term then beyond that as well, that we talk about lusting after power or whatever it might be, that there is this attraction that we have as we pursue various aspects of life. Anyway, for this certain Dr. Ivanka, here's what that person said as to the benefits of lust over love. Usually most relationships spawn up from the lust phase because being the sexually driven species that we are, it all starts with lust, and naturally we would like it to end there as well. But if we were to be 100% honest with each other, real love can be boring, and that is just a sad truth for many. Well, I submit to you, if what you understand as love in your life is somehow in any way boring or inadequate, it's not real love. And this is one of the key pieces that I really desire our culture to get to know, that this is what God hopes for us, that we settle for so much less than what God would have us, that we are focused on how things benefit ourselves, and we don't recognize that the point of the sermon is that love is when we seek to benefit one another, that there is a greater pleasure when we seek to bring delight to one another, and that is real love, and that this article seems to recognize what I see in our culture, that we don't think it's possible. We've seen so many things that have gone awry. We hear terrible stories all the time, not least to which, celebrity stories that get lived out in nasty details in public. And we think, real love. And to understand, yes, this is looking specifically, perhaps, at male-female romantic kind of relationships, but this is broader than that. This is about all the kinds of relationships we have. To be bringing those to mind as we think through this. What are my relationships? Are they ones that are driven by seeking personal benefit? Or are they relationships that seek to benefit one another? That's the deal. So, I give you an illustration of what that looks like. And that is the romance of Boaz and Ruth. So yes, Naomi is the mother-in-law of Ruth, and there had been a famine in Israel, so the family decides they're going to go off to Moab. And yep, her husband dies, and the two sons will die, but not until they've gotten married. And Naomi has nothing now for her. She's too old, really, to get married again. The youngsters, they're young enough, they could get married again. So Naomi says, you two, you should just stay in Moab, have a good life. But for me, there's just poverty, really. But at least I can have a little bit of support if I go back home to Israel. Now there's food, the famine is over, and there are some family there that will help me in that notion of how widows get to glean after there has been some grain left in the harvest. So that's why she goes back. But Ruth says, no, I'm going to stick with you. And so she comes now to a place where she is a foreigner. Kind of like Naomi had gone to a place she didn't know. Now Ruth goes to this place where she doesn't know. But they do understand that there is this rule that now makes sense. Ruth's the younger person, that she will go out and glean in the fields. But this is one of those stories, and who doesn't appreciate a love story, right? And it's a little bit like one of those Hallmark stories. You're really counting on that it ends up good. Well, it is, but as we journey along, in the context of life, you can't be sure, and that's where we're going to reside this day, of that uncertainty. So, but you have Naomi with those feminine machinations. Perhaps you know of them. Maybe you know of this old adage that males chase females until she catches him. You do that. You got that one, right? Yeah, see, he knows that. Yeah, you should know that one. How the chase is like backwards. And that's what's happening here. Because evidently, Naomi has it figured out. And so she wants Ruth to go glean in the fields of Boaz. And so evidently she kind of pushes Ruth to go in that direction. So Ruth goes off, she gleans, and she comes home with a nice amount of grain. And Naomi says, well, how'd it go? And yeah, even down to, the real stuff. It's a bit dangerous. Men might accost you. And so Noah is very safe, and it was a wonderful experience, and I got lots of grain. And well, where was this? Oh, it was at the farm of Boaz. And Naomi just kind of goes, oh, well, that's good. Now, since it went so well, I think you should just keep going back there. And Ruth goes, okay. Meanwhile, you have Boaz, a normal man, clueless as to what's going on behind his back. And this is where, again, that I make a case that, and I think that sometimes, particularly from a religious perspective, and why even people will say, oh, real love is boring. No, but we don't honor and recognize that kind of passionate, romantic love, yes, eros, is a gift and design of God. God designs us to have that kind of attraction to each other. And that's what's going on here. So you get into the mind of Boaz for a moment. Boaz is getting a little long in the tooth. Not really mentioned exactly how it is that he's not married, but he's not. And so he sees this young woman out in the field, and he sort of coyly comes up, to one of the workers and says, well, who's that young lady? And the answer is, well, that's Ruth. You've heard the story about Ruth. She's the daughter-in-law of Naomi. She's a Moabite, and she's kind of really committed to and helping find a way forward for Naomi. And he goes, Naomi, really? Oh, you mean like my relative, Naomi? And it goes, well, yeah, that's right. Now you have to understand another assumption of that culture is that, say a man dies, it is the expectation, if there is, say, a brother, that that brother would marry the woman, and so not only would she be taken care of, but there is the land as well that's connected to her that becomes now a part of still staying in that family structure. These were things that were important. These were the ways in which they did their culture. And so this now all of a sudden starts percolating in Boaz's mind, and he goes, well, isn't that interesting? But there is one guy, probably a younger guy, who could get first dibs on Ruth. That's a bit of a problem. And I'm an old guy. I mean, really. By rights, I should marry the old lady of Naomi, I suppose. He didn't say that, at least as reported in the Bible. But he had to think it, I'm sure. But in that culture, again, it was all about having babies, keeping that generation going, particularly male children. So the best way forward for that to happen would be for him to marry Ruth, the younger woman. Okay, so you can see how it was probably rationally working out, going back and forth in the mind of Boaz. All I was to say is there is definitely some romantic attraction going on here, and how it would seem that it goes both ways, nicely enough, but either one perhaps is not totally certain of that until matters will come. You'll have to come back for next week is when things really heat up. This was the uncertain moment this week, and I really like that in the sense of they don't know where this is going, but yet how it is that they choose to interact is really important. So while there is this romantic attraction, lust, if you will, it leads to the kind of love that our friends the Greeks would call agape, that love that is of God, that love that seeks to benefit one another, that serves another person, that says, the best way for me to find the greatest pleasure is to bring delight to the person I love. So that's what Boaz does. He can't in any way be sure that this is going to end up in a romantic marriage. He certainly hopes so, but that's not the point, and that's what's significant as we journey through the uncertainty of this chapter, that he is committed in his love for this woman Ruth, this real love, that he's going to make sure she has enough to eat. Whether or not she returns his romantic encouragement, he's committed to her. And so one night he goes, Ruth, how would you like to come to dinner? And so at dinner, it has all the people that were working in the fields, but no other widows happen to be there. Ruth is the only one. And after dinner, after she has more than she could possibly eat, he gives her so much grain that she almost can't carry it all home. And so she finally does get home, and Naomi probably said something like, well, you're kind of late this evening. And she says, well, yes, I had a lovely time. Boaz invited me to dinner, of all things. He's such a nice man. He seems to like me. That was a feminine hair thing, you know. You people don't know some things. I got to make sure you know. Okay. And Naomi goes, well, isn't that special? And only now does Naomi come clean. Surely Ruth has had an inkling that there was something going on here. But Naomi finally says, well, Ruth, you know that actually Boaz is a relative of mine. And in our culture, we do have this understanding that in order to keep the lineage going, keep the land in the same families, all that kind of thing, that we can hold him accountable to marrying you. It's like, oh, okay. But again, there's going to be another guy, and I mean, you would think, who wouldn't want the woman that brings land with her, right? You know, as an old farm boy, I understand what's going on here, and there is intrigue in several different ways that will happen in the next chapter that you will want to just really look forward to. And don't you dare be reading ahead. You know, I don't want people reading the Bible, for heaven's sake, so don't do that. All right. But the point is that this love from Boaz wants to bless Ruth no matter what. And that for us shows us the opportunity of a God-driven relationship that I submit to you is different than you're going to find anywhere else. And what I so yearn for our culture. You know, it's funny. It's like we don't feel that in a religious kind of context we can talk about these things. But, you know, we do sell hamburgers with half-naked women, right? Why do we do that? That was a Hardee's commercial. They don't show it anymore. There was a furrowed brow. Somehow you don't watch enough television. Or you're not a heterosexual male. I don't know. But yes, that Hardee's commercial was a little over the top. That's why it took us about a year before we went back to Hardee's, but that's another story. What is it? How is it that we don't incorporate that kind of wonderful, romantic sort of attraction that it is that comes from God, and we mess it up and we make it about me personally, and that somehow I want to go to a certain restaurant because of that commercial and how they showed a particular woman to me? What is that? What's that saying to our culture? It says a lot. And I submit to you that real love is possible, and that it brings to you the greatest delight that is out there. But just as we know from a secular standpoint that if you're down in the doldrums, right, you're just not happy, whatever, things are going poorly in one way or another, what's the best way to get out of the doldrums? It is to go and help someone, right? We know that. And as difficult as that is sometimes to do, if we go help someone else, if we do some servant kind of thing, whatever, do a nice thing for somebody else, we feel better all of a sudden. You go, wow, isn't that amazing? Well, no, it's not amazing, because that's how God hardwired us. And God also hardwired us for good relationships. When God started out, you know, he created things just as he wanted. Humans quickly messed it all up. The whole rest of the Bible is God trying to fix things, and he's still fixing us. And that's all about relationships. God wants to have that unified, wonderful relationship with us, and for us to have that kind of relationship with each other. No more, no less. That's what the Jesus journey is. That it begins now, and it goes for all eternity. So don't settle. Think about your relationships that you have. Are there some that seem to find their foundation on seeking personal benefit? And is there any way forward that you can bring a more Jesus mentality to it that seeks to bless others rather than focusing on self? If there doesn't seem to be, maybe you should let that go. And to the rest of your relationships, how do they make their foundation of seeking to benefit one another? How can you continue to build on that? How can you develop new relationships that are based on that kind of understanding that that's what love is, and that this is a love that touches anyone and everyone, even the stranger on the street, and that the curiosity is that when we bless others, God has hardwired us in such a way that the pleasure that comes back to us, the blessing, is greater than we could ever find if we were going out looking for just how to bless ourselves.